Imagine living in a world where your modern national identity simply does not exist. You are born in a specific place, you speak a specific language, and you share a culture with the people around you, but you do not belong to a country. This map shows 18th century Europe. Instead of clear borders, regions like Germany and Italy are shattered into dozens of tiny states. A merchant traveling to a neighboring city was forced to use different currencies and pay new taxes just to cross a local line. Your loyalty belongs exclusively to your local town or your king, making broader unity impossible. So how did the fragmented subjects of these tiny kingdoms eventually decide they belonged to a single unified nation? The breaking point occurred in France. The common people, the Third Estate, carried the entire financial burden of the state, while the nobility and the clergy lived in absolute luxury without paying taxes. By 1789, this systemic inequality reached a point of total collapse. The streets erupted in a full revolution. The people declared that a country does not belong to the king, power belongs to the citizens. But removing the monarchy left France in chaos. Out of that instability emerged a brilliant military strategist who seized control, Napoleon Bonaparte. He declared himself emperor, replacing one form of absolute rule with another. But Napoleon was also a reformer. As his army swept across Europe, he introduced the Code Napoleon. This system dismantled old feudal privileges, simplified the laws, and established the idea that individuals were equal before the law, regardless of their birth. Here is the paradox of his rule. Napoleon introduced progressive equality to regions like Germany and Italy, but he did so by conquering them. He installed centralized foreign governments over local populations. People naturally reject being ruled by an outside force, even one bringing reforms. By acting as a foreign oppressor, Napoleon gave the divided European populations a common enemy. He inadvertently forced these fragmented groups to unite as a tool of resistance, turning nationalism into a practical weapon. This resistance required a new kind of identity. Thinkers began arguing that local language and history defined the unique spirit of a people, transforming these elements from simple tools of communication into the core of a shared identity. The Romantic movement captured this feeling. Artists and writers glorified their local landscapes and revived old folk songs to give the public an emotional reason to want a unified homeland. At the same time, the Industrial Revolution created an educated middle class of businessmen and professionals. They had wealth and education, but zero political voice. They started demanding constitutional rights, the rule of law, and economic freedom, but they faced a massive practical barrier. In Germany, a merchant had to navigate between 30 and 40 different internal states. Every border crossing meant new taxes, slowing down trade, and bleeding profits. In 1834, the middle class pushed through a solution, the Zollverein. This economic union dropped internal trade barriers entirely, creating a single common market across the German states. Trade accelerated and the economy strengthened. This shared financial interest proved that practical economic unity was just as vital for a nation as shared poetry and art. That economic momentum eventually pushed the public into the streets. In 1848, a wave of uprisings swept across Europe. The masses violently demanded constitutions and unified nations. In Germany, representatives gathered at the Frankfurt Parliament to draft a constitution and formally offer the crown of a united Germany to the Prussian king. He flatly refused, stating he would not accept a crown offered by commoners. The revolutions were crushed by royal armies, yet the political landscape was permanently altered. Following 1848, monarchs who had once ruled with absolute authority were forced to introduce social reforms and parliaments to prevent another eruption. While the military campaigns failed, they broke the belief in the divine right of kings. The public had seen the throne tremble, and the realization that power could reside with the people became an unstoppable force in European politics. The failure of 1848 proved that idealists couldn't change borders with petitions. Otto von Bismarck, the Chancellor of Prussia, operated on a chillingly pragmatic philosophy. The great questions of the time would be decided by blood and iron. Bismarck executed a calculated military strategy. He defeated Denmark, turned against his ally Austria, and finally provoked France into a war. By 1871, he had successfully forced the German states to unite behind Prussia through sheer military victory. Down in Italy, the process of unification ran parallel, but it required a coordinated effort from three distinct types of leaders. Giuseppe Mazzini was the thinker who first planted the intellectual seed of Italian unity in the minds of the people. Count Cavour was the calculated diplomat who used political alliances with France to expel Austrian control from the north. Finally, Giuseppe Garibaldi was the revolutionary soldier who conquered southern Italy and handed the territory over to a unified crown. By combining ideology with diplomacy and warfare, Germany and Italy officially appeared on the map. Nationalism had mutated from a romantic rebellion into a state-sponsored military weapon. The success of these new nations created a deadly precedent in the Balkans. This was an incredibly dense area where multiple ethnic groups, Serbs, Croats, Bosnians, and Greeks, lived side by side. This map shows the Ottoman Empire's control over these diverse groups. Inspired by the rest of Europe, each ethnic population fiercely wanted their own independent single-culture nation. Surrounding empires saw an opportunity in this chaos. Russia and Austria actively tried to exploit these local independence movements to expand their own geopolitical influence over the territory. In a region with deeply mixed populations, the intense desire to carve out pure, single-culture borders created constant friction. That exact friction eventually ignited World War I. Looking back, we must ask if the rise of nationalism was a force for order or an engine for destruction. It united fragmented populations and replaced absolute monarchs with constitutions. It granted individuals a meaningful identity and laid the groundwork for modern democratic nations. Yet that same devotion to the nation fueled intense militarized rivalries. This drive for national expansion directly fueled the devastating conflicts of the 20th century. The modern map is defined by this tension. Our borders were forged through the same shared culture that granted people identity, and the same industrial warfare that eventually tore the continent apart. These lines were drawn not just by language and poetry, but by blood and iron.